Okay, colleagues, we're going to make a start. We started a little bit later than 12:30 because MEPs were in the Environment Committee. We had Commissioner Borge, the Health Commissioner in the Environment Committee, and that committee has just finished this minute. So I wanted to give my colleagues time to get across from one room to the other. So we agreed we would start just 10 minutes late to allow them to get here. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this workshop. I want to say a couple of things about the workshop, because I've seen some of the emails flying around and I've seen some of the things on the internet. Firstly, complaints by the industry that they're not invited to be speaking here today. This workshop was organised by myself and the committee because we're discussing how to regulate e-cigarettes. The e-cigarette industry had a separate hearing, as they know, with MEPs a few weeks ago, and we heard your positions, and you've been sending your positions in to us. And we have them. I have a list now. I have all your comments. Some of them, some papers being circulated today from the industry. So they are here today. The idea today was to listen. Well, we had hoped to listen to the FDA, the Americans, but unfortunately they can't be here today because, as you know, they are also working on e-cigarette regulation. But we are going to hear from the World Health Organization to give us an overview of what's happening in different jurisdictions. Then we have regulators from different countries. I have met the UK regulator, but I have not met the other regulators, and so I do not know what the other regulators are going to say. Unfortunately, the German regulator is no longer able to be here. One of the reasons given for her not being here is the receipt of unpleasant emails about her appearance here today. Now, I know that people have very strong feelings on this subject, but I hope we all understand that we as MEPs are here to get the best possible regulation of these products. Not to ban them, as is going around a lot on the internet, but to get the best possible regulation. So we will hear the comments of the German regulator, but read by our policy department instead. I don't know what the regulators in different countries are doing, but people say, why do we listen to the regulators from national governments? Why? I just want to make it clear. MEPs will not regulate on this alone. We have to reach agreement with Council, with the ministers from 27 different countries, and they are taking advice from their regulators. So it's extremely important that Parliament knows what the thinking is in national jurisdictions about e-cigarettes. So we will listen to regulators. Then we will listen to some healthcare professionals. We invited the European Society to suggest some experts to us. I don't know those experts, and we will listen to what they have to say on the different issues because MEPs wanted to know more about nicotine addiction and the differences between smoking cigarettes and e-cigarettes. And finally, there was a request from MEP to hear some users, and we chose the Users Association from Germany because they have the most users of e-cigarettes at the moment. So that's what we're going to do. I've read lots of other things, that we have an unholy alliance between myself and the tobacco industry. People who know me might think twice about that comment, and also the pharmaceutical industry. This workshop has been organised to listen to people so that MEPs can come to their own view. And that's what we're doing. We're going to listen to experts, take soundings, and try to come up with a framework. Because listening to industry as well, many of you have said that we need some kind of framework, and that is what we're trying to achieve. So, without any further ado, I want to move on to the programme. As I said, we have a number of experts with us today. But before we listen to our experts, I'm very pleased that the European Commission is going to present its proposal to us. The Commission has made a proposal on e-cigarettes that most of you will have read. And Martin Seychell, the Deputy Director of DG Sanco, is going to explain the Commission's proposal to us and why they chose the options and why they discarded other options in favour of the one they came up with. So, Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Elinda. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank Mrs. McAvan for bringing us together today and for arranging this very important discussion on electronic cigarettes. Let me start with a very important clarification also in the light of what has just been said. The Commission has absolutely no intention to ban electronic cigarettes. It was never an intention, and it will never be our intention. What we want is that these products actually develop their full potential as effective and safe smoking cessation products and as alternatives to cigarettes. We therefore want these products to be successful on the market in the long term, not to be seen as novelty products or as gimmicks, but as products in their own right. But for this to happen, we strongly believe that they should receive an appropriate regulatory approval, that they are of good quality, safety and efficacy. I would like to recall that, as far as we see it in the Commission, the role of regulation is not just to react to current situations or to what has happened in the past, but also to give clear direction on how we would like a specific market to develop in the future. I think that's an important role of regulation which we should not overlook. Let me give you some background, first of all, what led to the Commission proposal. I think we all agree that the European electronic cigarettes market is evolving very quickly. The UK Association of Electronic Cigarettes Traders has informed us that the market currently sees monthly growth rates of 30%. Now, these may be, of course, initial growth spurt figures, and obviously it may be difficult or impossible to maintain these kind of growths in future, but certainly, whichever way we look at it, the growth rates are certainly impressive. We also see a number of other interesting developments, market entry of new players. We see increasingly big advertising campaigns for electronic cigarettes on TV and other media. We see shops selling electronic cigarettes being set up everywhere. So clearly there is a boom in this area, but so far without a clear legislative framework. The fact is that today these products are only regulated in a very general way by the General Product Safety Directive. Now, the General Product Safety Directive is legislation which was intended for basic consumer items, things like furniture or clothing, certainly not for substances or products of this kind. All it has is a general presumption of safety. I think we should all agree that we need to have something a bit more reassuring than that. Traditionally, most consumers use electronic cigarettes to stop or reduce smoking. In other words, many consumers use products as cessation aids, just like others use nicotine replacement therapies. Now, from a health perspective, we, of course, welcome every person who manages to stop or reduce smoking, because this means less premature deaths, less years in poor health conditions caused by tobacco consumption, and less health costs connected to tobacco. But, of course, to be able to have an assurance that this is actually going to happen in the long term, we also need good manufacturing practices for electronic cigarettes are needed. Some manufacturers have told us that, at some products on the market, we cannot really be sure of the exact concentration, for example, the level of impurities in these products. These are fundamental issues. Above all, the efficacy of the products, especially for cessation purposes, is very often not tested, let alone confirmed. And to cap it all, we have had a number of rapid alerts for malfunctioning electronic cigarettes in our RAPEX system. And this, therefore, all of this confirms the need, in our view, for a regulatory framework. We also see a very worrying trend, because it's one thing to encourage use of these products by existing smokers. I think there we have a lot of common ground. But we also see young people starting to use electronic cigarettes because they perceive these products as being fashionable or cool. A recent study on the Hungarian market confirmed that in the month of May 2012, so very recently, May 2012, 13% of children aged between 13 and 15 had used electronic cigarettes. That's 13% of a very young age group. And studies from other member states confirm this trend. So this is a development which we observe with great concern. We know what nicotine is. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance. And the fact is that however successful e-cigarettes are, the most widely available form of nicotine will remain for a long time the traditional cigarette. And there is therefore a real risk that electronic cigarettes, especially when started at such a young age, could become an entry gate for young people into nicotine. And that young addicts later on might change to other products which contain nicotine, which are the classic tobacco products. This is another good reason to act. In our view, we must combat addiction, not promote it. I would like to give you two further reasons why our proposal was shaped the way it was. First of all, a fact, there are very significant discrepancies currently between national legislations on how to regulate electronic cigarettes. There is clearly an internal market issue. And there is also sufficient under-enforcement. From a European perspective, this is really problematic for the functioning of the internal market and for its future development, because there is little legal certainty. We believe also there is a need for a more level playing field. We cannot continue to subject different nicotine replacement therapies to different regulatory regimes. Currently, we have some products like patches, sprays and chewing gums which have been authorized as pharmaceutical products. Others which contain exactly the same active substance, just in a different form of delivery, regulated in a completely different way. So this is clearly not a level playing field. Now, we obviously reflected very deeply about what would be the appropriate regulatory framework for electronic cigarettes. And we asked ourselves a number of key questions. First of all, how could we ensure that electronic cigarettes are safe and respect good manufacturing practices? How do we ensure that electronic cigarettes develop their full potential for cessation and thus help people to quit using tobacco products, ideally completely, but even partially? How do we ensure, as I have just said, that electronic cigarettes do not develop into an attractive product for young people and promote nicotine addiction? We found the answer to all these questions in the pharmaceutical legislation. Pharmaceutical legislation ensures good manufacturing practices. It would also ensure that the products would be effective for smoking cessation or for their intended purpose, their therapeutic indication. And if these products were to be approved as medicines, they would not be so attractive to young people. There is also the advantage that pharma legislation is a well-established regulatory framework. We have existing administrative structures that work. We have guidance which is tried and tested. We have loads of experience with the pharma legislation. So the level of legal certainty which would be achieved in this way would be much greater than through any other means. We therefore believe that subjecting electronic cigarettes above a certain threshold to marketing authorization under the pharmaceutical legislation is an appropriate solution. Now, we have heard a lot of arguments raised. Some have argued that electronic cigarettes are not pharmaceuticals and therefore they cannot fall under this legislation and that they are not presented as a cessation aid. Now, obviously, the Commission here is bound by the legal boundaries of EU law, but also what is happening in practice. All studies show that consumers do use these products as cessation aids, and the nicotine delivered from electronic cigarettes has exactly the same pharmacological function as nicotine delivered through other delivery mechanisms used in nicotine replacement therapies, whether they are patches, sprays, and inhalators, all of which have already been authorized under the pharma legislation. Therefore, we consider that our proposal to subject these products to the pharmaceutical legislation is both proportionate and legal. In any event, the legislator is entitled to clarify, in this case in the tobacco products legislation, that electronic cigarettes above the threshold do require marketing authorization under pharmaceutical legislation. Another argument is that the Commission proposal would be the end of the many SMEs active in the market. There seems to be the underlying assumption that pharma legislation is only for big companies and that small companies are excluded. Reality is otherwise. The vast majority of pharmaceutical companies are SMEs. We have a lot of very active and successful SMEs in the pharmaceutical sector. What these companies have differently is that they think like pharmaceutical companies. They put quality control, good manufacturing practice, responsibility at the heart of their operations. And this is exactly what we would like to see. But it would be a mistake to assume that pharmaceutical legislation is somehow a no-go area for SMEs. This is absolutely not the case. In any case, the future of this market will be dictated by other things in addition to the regulatory regime. There is increasing competition on the market between big and small players. We see companies that run big advertising budgets. So these are clearly challenges for SMEs, and therefore we believe that having a higher degree of legal certainty would help in this respect. As I said before, the aim of legislation is to look ahead, not just to look back. There will certainly be some costs and efforts for producers to obtain a marketing authorization for their products. But these costs and efforts have to be seen, first of all, in the light of the higher degree of ensuring quality, safety and efficacy that would be achieved. And fundamentally, it is the size of the actual or potential market that has to be considered when deciding whether costs are proportionate or not. So this is something which has to be kept in mind. The third major area of concern we often hear about is that some consumers express concerns that they prefer to buy electronic cigarettes in shops or supermarkets and would not like to be obliged to buy the products in a pharmacy. Now, let me be very clear what the Commission is proposing. First of all, we are proposing a threshold. So e-cigarettes with nicotine levels below that threshold would not be considered as pharmaceuticals and could continue to be sold freely, albeit with some improved warnings about safety. But in any case, we do not believe, first of all, that sales in pharmacies and similar retailers would in itself be a major obstacle for consumers to get access to these products. A number of products, not just pharmaceuticals, are sold very successfully from these outlets. But fundamentally, it is the member states who decide whether a medicine can be sold by pharmacists only or by other persons. We have a number of cases in many member states where even OTC pharmaceuticals can be sold from other establishments. So this is something which the member states can fully regulate, and it is not part of the Commission proposal. The Commission is not specifying anything in its proposal about point of sale. So to conclude, I firmly believe that the pharmaceutical legislation is a good regulatory framework for e-cigarettes. It would ensure quality, safety and efficacy of these products and help them therefore develop their full cessation potential also as concrete alternatives to cigarettes, and would also ensure that these products do not develop into an entry gate for nicotine addiction for young people. Thank you.
Thank you. We haven't got questions to the Commission on the programme, but if the Commission agrees, maybe we could listen to the WHO and then take a joint question to both of you at the end of that proposal, because we have 15 minutes allocated then, and maybe we could combine those two question times. So thank you. So we'll have an opportunity to ask the Commission questions in about 10 minutes' time. So we now move on to Mr. Bertolini, who is the Chief Scientist and the WHO representative of the European Union, to give us an overview of evidence the WHO has collected. And I think, have people got this slide presentation? There is a slide presentation going to happen. I think the slides have been made available. So over to you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for inviting us to share with you the latest evidence from WHO with respect to the use of electronic cigarettes. As you know, this is a very controversial issue. There are several studies and also small studies in some cases which are published on an almost continuous basis. So what I'm summarizing to you is a sort of consolidated evidence that we have at the moment, although the work is continuing and is updated on a regular basis. Now, oops. Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to say to you are, I'll talk about 4 issues. First of all, I will introduce very briefly what is an electronic nicotine delivery system. Afterwards, I will talk about the scientific evidence with respect to the use and the consequences of the use of the electronic cigarettes. Then some reflections and some data on the global availability of electronic cigarettes coming from a survey that WHO has carried out within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control initiatives. And finally, I will summarize what is our position at the moment. This position is being developed and will be published officially at a later stage during this month of May, possibly. Now, let's go to the first issue. I mean, we all speak about electronic cigarettes. I'm sure you all know what they are, but just to make sure that we are on a common ground, these are, new devices which are designed to deliver nicotine to the lungs. They were first marketed in 2004. They are battery powdered, so there is a battery, ion battery to power them. They deliver a vaporized propylene glycol nicotine mixture into the respiratory system, reaching the lungs. They contain tobacco-derived substances, but they don't necessarily use tobacco for their operations, and they often are offered with flavors just to favor the consumption among adolescents and other groups. Now, I don't know if you can see the bottom of this slide, but I mean, it's basically a scheme. This is a prototype of these electronic nicotine delivery systems. There are three main components. There is a smart chip and a lithium-ion battery, which are used to rechargeable, which are used to give power to the system. Then there is a nicotine cartridge, and then an atomization chamber. Basically, the liquid is vaporized when you inhale, and then it emits a little bit of vapor, and then the rest goes into the lung. They don't generate, I mean, the same type of smoke, which is associated with conventional tobacco cigarettes, but it's something different from that. Now, I mean, as I said, I mean, there's been a number of investigations and studies, sometimes of different sides. Sometimes the sponsorship of these studies is not disclosed, and this creates a little bit of a problem. But in general terms, I mean, what I would like to summarize here to you are the main findings of these studies. The first is that what comes out of the electronic cigarettes is not totally, safe. I mean, there are some, at least 10 toxicants which have been identified in a study which has been carried out recently, including some known carcinogens and the diethylene glycol, which is an ingredient used for antifreeze. So it's not just, the nicotine, it's also something else. At least 10 toxicants have been identified. In Turkey, where a study was carried out very recently, propylene glycol, which is a potential toxic, although the toxicity of this substance is not well established, was found in all samples, and then also some tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are carcinogens, and in a majority of the samples which have been tested. E-cigarettes release toxins into the air, including acetic acid, acetone, isopropene, formaldehyde, and it's approximately 20% of the average emission of conventional cigarettes. So there is something coming out. And all e-cigarettes are, that the FDA has detained and examined, meet definition of a combination drug device product under the FDA law. This is a very important definition which is used in the United States to regulate the consumption and the use of these devices. Now, somebody will talk more about nicotine later on during this day, but I just would like to mention that nicotine is an addictive substance, as you know, and is not totally, safe. Nicotine you can have overdose of nicotine, which can create major problems, both to the gastrointestinal, respiratory, cardiovascular, neurological system, and the uncertainty on the dosage and the way in which the electronic cigarettes work, and also cases of malfunctioning that were mentioned before by Martin Seychell, might produce a high level of nicotine, which might, particularly if used by children, adolescents, determine some cases of acute intoxication, which has to be taken into account. There are also some additional concerns about electronic cigarettes. First of all, there are no published studies so far which are demonstrating the efficacy and safety of these devices on the long term. You might wish to consider that these have been marketed, relatively recently, but still this is a problem because we are talking about a long-term habit of people, and therefore, if we talk about cessation devices, we have to make sure that these are devices which can be, effective also on the medium-long term. There is no data also to confirm that these devices are sensory characteristics which are mimicking the cigarettes when they are eaten and delivered to the lung. So there are some uncertainty about the efficacy of this particular mechanism. As I said also before, the precise nature and the quantity of the constituents which are emitted by the ENDS are also unknown and might vary. The studies are not yet are not yet established fully these things, which might also vary according to the products. And there is also, as I said, a potential for poisoning from the sale of nicotine refill vials. And in addition to that, there are other considerations that need to be done with respect to e-cigarettes. First of all, without regulations, electronic cigarette smoking will be normalized, of course will be normalized, and be glamorized maybe, or might be glamorized as like cigarette smoking. So this is a concern that we need to address. Secondly, people who consider quitting smoking, cigarette smoking, might develop a new habit, which is this one, of course, I mean, as we said, potentially less toxic and less dangerous, but it can also take to relapse of a consumption of conventional cigarettes, can keep the habit while not interrupting it. E-cigarettes are promoted on the occasions when one cannot smoke, and this would, contrast the smoke-free laws which are present in many countries, and this will normalize cigarette smoking in a sense. People can smoke in public places electronic cigarette and smoke conventional cigarettes at home or in other environments. And there is no knowledge, precise knowledge about the levels of carcinogens in the second-hand smoke. According to the few studies which have been carried out, this is much smaller, of course, of what it is in the second-hand smoke of normal cigarettes, but still there is some uncertainty and concern about this content. Now, very briefly about global availability of the e-cigarettes. As was already mentioned, the consumption in the European Union has increased dramatically over the last months and years. 7% of citizens have at least tried electronic cigarettes. In Australia, where there is this law about plain packaging, electronic cigarettes do not meet the criteria for plain packaging, so they avoid these regulations, and this can promote further their use. There are some problems in some countries, like in the United Kingdom. There are some loophole in the regulations, so the electronic cigarettes with nicotine are sold and without nicotine are sold in other environments. So it's a little bit of a complication that needs to be addressed. And also, the trends and the limited regulations suggest that the e-cigarettes use will continue to grow, as was mentioned by Martin Seychell before, despite limited understanding of the product's characteristics. So this is a market which is growing by itself, so it needs to be somehow addressed. It's interesting to note also that there is a growing tobacco industry involvement in the e-cigarettes business. Philip Morris has 3 prototypes that more resemble traditional cigarettes than eats and do not burn. So this is an interesting development. There have been acquisition of companies by the big tobacco companies. There are new cigarettes, new electronic cigarettes being produced by R.J. Reynolds. And so this might signal also that major cigarette manufacturers are indicating that they believe this is the next frontier for their companies. And, okay, this is not necessarily a problem, but, I mean, it might indicate also an important consideration to be taken into account when doing the regulations. So, in other words, without regulations, tobacco companies will use their unparalleled knowledge in this area to produce and market e-cigarettes. And we never know exactly what they can make and what are the projects and the programs they have in mind. Now, with respect to the global use, WHO carried out a survey among the parties of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control recently, and the e-cigarettes were the most common form of electronic nicotine delivery systems. They are followed by e-cigars. I didn't know the existence of e-cigars when I studied this paper, for this paper. And all countries reporting electronic cigarettes were indeed among high-income or middle-income countries, and while the low-income countries were not, it was not available. On the parties that stated the presence of ENDS, only 4 countries have actually regulated them and are banned the manufacture, importation, distribution, and sales. They are Brazil, the Seychelles, Singapore, and Uruguay. Regulations, as I said, are sometimes a little bit complex. I mean, you cannot see that from the bottom, but from the back of the room. But I think if you have it in your in your handout, you can see that there are some inconsistency among in the regulations within countries. I mean, so you can see that there are some issues that need to be addressed to make a more consistent and a more effective regulations in place for this type of product. Let me conclude you with what is the WHO position at the moment on this particular problem. Electronic nicotine delivery systems are currently not regulated by the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control as such. However, their use undermines at least 3 articles of the Framework Convention, which is Article 6 on taxation, Article 8 on second-hand smoke, and are also exempted from Article 11, which is plain packaging, as I mentioned before with the case of Australia as an example. Regardless of whether they are covered by the treaty, the ENDS may normalize smoking and encourage dual use and bypass smoking ban in public places. I think these 3 concepts have to be taken into account in addition to what has been mentioned before and what will be certainly mentioned in the following interventions. They might encourage dual use and bypass smoking ban in public places, thus normalizing the cigarette smoking after so many decades in which we tried to create altogether a sort of different perception with respect to cigarette smoking, which was quite effective. ENDS should be subject, in our opinion, they should be subject to regulation of both tobacco products and medical products. Finally, let me conclude with a few, statements which summarize what I said so far, that, ENDS contain toxic chemicals in different quantities, in quantities which are lower than the quantities in normal cigarettes, but still they contain toxic chemicals. Their safety and impact on smoking cessation and on health has not been fully assessed. And this is an important thing to say. We need to have more information to make sure that you can implement proper regulations. Increasing use without full assessment of the consequences signals that regulations are necessary. Now, at the moment, the situation what it is now cannot continue. It needs to be regulated somehow. WHO suggests that the NDS should be regulated through a 2-pronged approach, as both tobacco products and as medical products, to prevent a situation in which there are loopholes, and the ENDS escape control. Claims which imply health benefits, less harm than cigarettes, or smoking cessation efficacy should not be allowed unless proven. As I said before, there are studies indicating this issue, but I think we are not at the point in which we can draw this conclusion clearly, particularly for long-term use. And finally, we strongly believe that the burden of research demonstrating safety, efficacy, and efficiency should be on manufacturers and producer of NDS, similar to what happens for pharmaceutical products. And I think with this I would like to thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to Linda again.
And thank you very much for that presentation. So I'm now going to take questions to the 2 speakers who have spoken already. I'm going to prioritise MEPs at this stage. We have a lot of colleagues here, and if we've got time, we will take other people. But we've also got quite a lot of time allocated at the end as well, 45 minutes, 50 minutes at the end. I know colleagues have other meetings. So I see Glenis Willmott first of all. I see Chris Davies, Rebecca Taylor. Maybe somebody who's not British might ask a question. I can see other people. I'm going to take MEPs first, yes. Glenis Willmott.
Just a very quick question to the Commissioner. How did you determine the threshold when you were dealing with e-cigarettes, which should be dealt with under pharmaceutical legislation and which shouldn't?
Yes, thank you. As I said before, a key consideration was the level playing field issue. So we looked at existing products, existing nicotine replacement products of various forms, which have already been authorized in a number of member states as pharmaceutical products. And that was the basis of the limit. We took the lowest limit that had already been the basis for an authorization. And the reason we did this was, apart from the level playing field issue, the fact that the marketing authorization has already been granted in at least one member state shows that that concentration has been shown to be effective for a particular therapeutic indication. So that was how we arrived at the limit. As I said, a prime objective for the Commission is to increase the level of legal certainty. So we proposed on the basis of actual experience. So the threshold is not an arbitrary one. It's not a level that the Commission somehow arrived at. It's based on actual experience, products which have successfully passed the authorization procedure in Member States.
Okay, I've got Chris Davies.
Well, briefly, yes, of course, there should be further studies into e-cigarettes, and yes, there should be as much information given to potential consumers as possible, and yes, there should be measures taken to ensure that the products are designed properly and are safe to use and such like. But we have hundreds of thousands of people dying of smoking-related disease each year. Tobacco is not a medicinal product. Why are you not making cigarettes a medicinal product? You know, that's a way of getting nicotine. Frankly, I listen to all this, and of course you can take virtually any product. I wouldn't be surprised if the carbon dioxide in this bottle, you know, there's all sorts of analysis you could subject that to. I mean, I could take you through 7 months of watching my father dying from lung cancer as a confirmed 60-a-day addict. And all I think is that, you know, with all the difficulty he had of giving up, I think e-cigarettes could have kept him alive for another 10 years or so. And I'm really appalled by, frankly, the overreaction of the Commission on this. Of course, we've got to take it sensibly and seriously, but if these save lives, then why put restrictions in the way of their use at this time?
Yeah, go on.
Well, a medicinal product is specifically designed to treat and prevent disease. It's in its definition. So clearly, the fact, yes, we have tobacco smoking leads to 700,000 deaths in Europe alone every year. So it should be treated like any other disease. It is a disease. And the answer to a disease is a medicinal product. Because we need to make sure that the public, consumers, can be reassured that there are effective products on the market which can be demonstrated to be safe and effective in combating this disease. Because taking your argument, if I may, to its extreme, with saying a lot of people die of heart disease or die of high blood pressure, why do we subject those products to pharmaceutical legislation? Why don't we just make these products freely available as general products? It's exactly the same argument. Tobacco addiction is a disease. It's a frightening disease, and therefore we need to have the appropriate response. Now, as regards cigarettes, cigarettes are the problem. And the whole legislation, and we have years of measures, not just legislation, but also taxation, information campaigns. There is no other product where we have such an active policy to specifically reduce consumption. Now, we all know why cigarettes are legal. It's an accident of history. If they were launched as new products today, they wouldn't last 5 minutes. But the issue is they are there. We have millions of addicted people, and we need to give them a proven, safe way of getting off cigarettes. The answer to that is not deregulation or absence of regulation. It's proper regulation.
Rebecca Taylor.
Thank you. Just to ask a couple of clarifications to the Commission. You mentioned in your presentation that young people were attracted to e-cigarettes. Could you confirm if those young people were already smokers? Because all the evidence I've seen is that virtually, I don't know what percentage, something was produced actually, I've sent it round the Environment Committee today by ASH, the Action on Smoking and Health in the UK, to show that I think less than 1% of young people who tried an e-cigarette were not smokers. So basically the majority of them were already smokers. And the other thing about the gateway, I'd also understood there was no evidence, I haven't seen any myself, of e-cigarettes being a gateway to tobacco. Given that they don't taste like tobacco and tobacco doesn't taste very nice, I would heavily question that.
No, on the specific study, recent studies, I quoted one from Hungary, but there are others, studied a specific age cohort, 13 to 15-year-olds, so very young. So clearly, at that age, hopefully, they are not already smoking, but even if they are, and some of them probably are, they certainly would not be really addicted to the product. Because to be addicted at the age of 13, you must have started when you are 9 or 10. So clearly, the studies focused on this specific age group, to look at the attractiveness aspect of, for young people. evidence as to the gateway potential, I think clearly, for example, the fact is that unlike patches, unlike sprays, unlike gums, these products are designed to look like cigarettes. There are even features added on to electronic cigarettes, like the light which comes on at the tip, which have absolutely no functional reason. It's just there to reinforce the perception that this is a cigarette. So clearly, this is a specific marketing which is aimed at emphasizing this similarity. So we talk about gateway potential. There is clearly the potential because it's the same addictive substance and the product is interchangeable. Right? So clearly that is something we need to be aware of.
I just wanted to point out one reflection that I make as a public health professional rather than a WHO staff member. So we have a major epidemics in Europe, as Mr. Davies was pointing out, and I think we need to do everything we can to address this epidemic and reduce, the consumption of smoking. Electronic cigarettes might help in this respect, but why not regulating them as cigarettes on one hand and as pharmaceutical products on the other hand? I think this is something which will include these products within an existing framework, avoid this dual use, for instance, or the risks of glamorizing again the use of cigarettes, and allowing the use when, if somebody wants to do that way, for decreasing addiction. Although, as I said before, we are not certain that this is actually working in this regard. There are anecdotal reports, some studies, but still the evidence is not so strong to say for sure that these are effective instruments to reduce the tobacco addiction. Although this is not the case yet, I think we should not discourage completely the use of these devices, but put them in a proper regulation. And in our opinion, this should be a dual regulation on the tobacco side and on the pharmaceutical side.
Yeah, we've got about time for. Do any of my colleagues? No, I'm not. No, none of them. Okay, there's a gentleman there. I want whoever speaks say who they are. And we've got time for 2 or maybe 3 questions now. But we have got time at the end as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I think, is it headphones? Take the headphones away from the microphone. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, also, yeah.
Okay. My name is Riccardo Polosa. I'm professor of medicine at the University of Catania. I'm the scientific representative for LIAF, the Italian League Against Smoking. I just wanted to make a couple of comments to both rapporteurs. And the first question, in a way, connects very much to what you were saying. I don't know the name of the lady there. Actually, there is quite a lot of evidence in the literature that these products are no getaway to tobacco smoking. There are at least 5 papers. And I feel sorry for listening to you reporting an Hungarian unknown study that I'm sure not even you know, Jean-Luc. But there are at least 5 large papers, and they can back up that there's no such a concern. The other problem is, at the end of this nice talk, I'm still confused about the EU Commission wanted to regulate these products either as tobacco or as medicinal or as a general product. There's been confusion. I'm sure many of you in the audience have shared the same. When you want to regulate something as a pharmaceutical product, you really need to look at the claim. So if the claim is smoking cessation or reduction, yeah, okay, in that case, regulation should go towards a medicinal product. We're still talking about nicotine, which is not a new molecule, so some soft regulation should be applied in that case. And also, I may be cynical, but even salt can be looked as and viewed as a medicinal product because salt can reduce high blood pressure. Are we going to regulate salt as well?
Yes. Okay, I saw my colleague Karl Schlyter and Mrs. Ries, and then I'll take one more, but we have to be quick. Karl, and then I will come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll have to stop the questions then to the next round.
Yeah, my question is on how necessary is it to have propylene glycol in the cigarettes, because a large part of them are releasing that, and it has been added to cigarettes before. but it has several different effects. But when we have approved it as an additive, normally it's, oral intake. But in inhalation, you might have different toxicity data. So do you know enough about the toxicity data for inhalation for propylene glycol to make a judgment on how bad that is? And my second question then is, why is it necessary for these cigarettes to have that in it? Is it to increase the penetration of nicotine in the lungs, using that as a surfactant, or is it other reasons? If it's only for purely aesthetic reasons to make the smoke, are there any studies showing that you need the smoke in order to have this as a facilitation to stop smoking, or is it just pure decoration that has unnecessary toxic effects?
Okay, I'm going to take the three now because we're running out of time. Frédérique Ries, I saw.
Thank you so much. I'm even more puzzled than when I entered the room, I must say. The difference, the huge gap that seems to appear between what we call in French le pays légal et le pays réel, the real picture and the legal picture, it seems even bigger than it was. We up to some point understand the efforts of the Commission, but now I have the feeling it's a bulldozer of the Commission wanting to have it all on the scope of the pharma legislation, which certainly is a gift for them, but I wonder if it's going to be a gift for the SMEs and certainly not for the users, because it creates a difficulty for these SMEs to be on board and certainly for the users concerning the access to the products. So why such, I really wonder, it's not rhetorical, why such a huge discrepancies between your picture and the one that we catch, not from the industry, the one that we catch, most of us catch from our relations, our contacts with the consumers, with the users, with les vapoteurs en français, with the vapors or whatever in English, I don't know, those who use it and who individually, not lobbyists, write to us and describe a totally different picture. So, and concerning I'm trying to make it short, concerning the studies, I don't challenge them at all, that you have coming the young as a target, the young people. Of course, we completely share that. They never have to become a target, and this is really a concern of us, but again, the young people that I meet all tell us it's way too expensive for us. So maybe the thing is it's going to get cheaper. I don't know. We have to be cautious about this, not becoming a seducing tool and less expensive. But for the moment, it's too expensive for them. So the figures that we have is that since we have this on board 10 years ago, we've only managed to reduce the first starters by 1/5, 20%, 20%. Professor Doutzenberg in France, for example, a very well-known tobacologist, says that with electronic cigarettes that he doesn't like, but still at the end of the day, it's the same figure of people who quit smoking forever. So there it is. It's a new tool. We demand from them things that we took 60 years to demand from the chemicals industry, and I really wonder about the discrepancy. This is a huge puzzle for me.
And finally, in this round, this is the person here.
Yes, very briefly. My name is Jean-Francois Etter. I'm a professor of public health at the University of Geneva. With Riccardo Polosa, I think I'm among the few people in this room who actually conducted research on electronic cigarettes for several years. And I must tell you that the science of electronic cigarettes has not been fairly represented here today. A number of things have been said that have no scientific basis at all. Among the things that have been said, as the WHO representatives say, e-cigarettes renormalize smoking. If they help people quit, then the contrary is probably true. And is dual use a problem? Well, if they reduce the number of cigarettes they smoke, then it's a good thing, dual use. Will they undermine smoke-free laws? Well, if people quit smoking, it will help smoke-free laws. As for the Commission, they say that the threshold of 2 milligrams to nanograms is not arbitrary. It is entirely arbitrary. There is no science base at all between this threshold. And this threshold will have the result of prohibiting e-cigarettes because it's not enough. People need 20 milligrams, not 2 milligrams. And also, another very important point is that the only company that has an e-cigarette approved by the MHRA for clinical trials today, you know who it is? ETC and Creative, owned by BAT, by British American Tobacco. So if you regulate this as a medicinal product, the consequence will be that you will hand the whole business over to the tobacco companies as it is today. Thank you very much.
Professor, you're speaking later. I see you're one of our speakers, so you'll be able to put your points. I saw the chair of our committee, Matthias Groote, so I'm going to make an exception to one more question from him.
Thank you very much, Linda. I must say, as we start with the Tobacco Directive, the whole debate in the Environment Committee, the e-cigarette was only a small part. But I must say the Commission is fighting really hard for this small part to ban it, because 4 milligrams means to ban the e-cigarette from the market. And there are so many question marks because we have no scientific-based studies and so on and so on. The question is it really the right place to include the e-cigarette into the Tobacco Directive? Is it really the right place?
Okay. The Commission first to respond to those questions, some of which were quite provocative.
First of all, this idea of a ban. The Commission is not proposing any kind of ban. Because if we start to equate pharmaceutical legislation with bans, well, there are thousands of pharmaceuticals on the market. Not all of them are very sophisticated, complex drugs. You have everything from analgesics, as I said, to nicotine replacement products who have already been authorized. So why would it be possible for the nicotine patches have not disappeared from the market. The nicotine gums have not disappeared from the market. They have managed to survive quite well. So clearly it is possible to meet the obligations of the pharmaceutical legislation. So that's the first thing. Second point, studies have been mentioned. Well, first of all, when we were doing the impact assessment for the Tobacco Products Directive, we took great care to ensure, certainly a lot of studies, but we are looking at studies which are, first of all, independent from the industry. We know very well that some studies have been financed by the industry. Okay, so that's something you need to ask yourselves exactly what is behind those studies. That's something the Commission takes very seriously. Of course, the issue of consumers was raised. Well, I am not surprised that consumers find these products attractive. As I said, the Commission does not see anything wrong per se in the products. But are consumers really informed about what's in the products? They don't even have ingredients labeling. Even a packet of crisps has more information for consumers than this. There is nothing to indicate that in this, some manufacturers actually admitted to us that they can't even guarantee the concentration of nicotine, the concentration of impurities. There is no good manufacturing practice. One batch might be completely different from another. Is this the basis for a good industry development in the future? So we are not against e-cigarettes. If we were against, we would have moved for a straightforward ban. We have not banned e-cigarettes at any concentration. What we want is a proper regulation and proper information for consumers and assurances.
Yeah, just very brief. I mean, there are many very interesting comments. I just would like to reflect a moment on the issue of the evidence and some considerations which were made. For instance, dual use is a positive thing. I don't think dual use is a positive thing because, cigarettes are carcinogens at any dose. So I don't think, encouraging the maintenance of the tobacco habits through certain, situations is a good thing, or glamorization of smoking is something that we should try to avoid. I mean, as Martin was pointing out, these e-cigarettes are made in such a way that they look like cigarettes. I mean, they actually have this light coming up. So, I mean, this will change the perception. And these behavioral studies are not so commonly done, as far as I understand, as far as I know. And I've seen some. I mean, I've not seen all the literature, and I'm working with colleagues who have done much more this than me. But I mean, some studies I've seen. I mean, studies looking at the consumption of e-cigarettes for 10 weeks or 12 weeks, like a study you did in Catania, I think. I mean, I think it's a too short time to draw some conclusions. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, I just would like to point this out. And so in summary, I think. There are some doubts about several aspects of the use of e-cigarettes. So I think calling for precaution in the regulations for the use of these products and ensuring the quality, as was pointed out before, I think is something which meets common sense considerations together with some public health considerations. So I think we should try to avoid strong positions in this case and trying to look at the available evidence with caution and to have a precautionary approach with respect to the use of these products with all the uncertainties surrounding it, not only the quality and the characteristics of the products, but also the patterns of use and the patterns of use on the long term, which I believe are absolutely uncertain at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to leave that round now, and we're going to move to listen to the regulators. We chose 3 regulators because they were regulators who've been working on e-cigarettes in recent times. And I've asked them to address a number of issues, to explain what the thinking is in their country, what the current position on e-cigarettes is, to comment on the Commission's proposal, to comment on the issues about harm reduction, to comment on the issues of is there evidence in their country of e-cigarettes being a gateway product for young people, to comment on things around issues around does it normalise smoking again, and any other issues that, and also an issue which keeps coming up to me, that if we, in some countries, and I think the Commission mentioned this, in some countries, if they're regulated as medicines, this means that e-cigarettes are only available in some outlets. In some countries, like my country, you can buy pharmaceutical products in many different outlets. In my local supermarket, in my local garage, I can buy aspirins and Disprins and paracetamol and all kinds of medicines. It's not the case in other countries. To address that issue, and also the cost and the time required to get a medicines authorisation, because the Commission has a proposal with transitional arrangements. Is that long enough? Is that serious, etc.? So I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and maybe they might want to pick up at some of the other points they've heard in the questions so far. So first of all, as I said, the German representative isn't here, so somebody was going to read out the statement, but maybe I don't know whether they're going to read the whole thing out, it's very long, or they could just pick out bits of it, or maybe I'll summarise it. We'll see what the 2 regulators from the UK and Finland say first, and then we'll deal with the presentation from Germany. So first of all, Jeremy Mean from the UK regulator.
Thank you very much, Linda, and perhaps just to it is on? Yes. Perhaps just by way of a word of introduction to me and the work that I've been leading in the UK. In 2010, in the UK, we held a public consultation on the regulation of nicotine-containing products, including electronic cigarettes. And at that time, the UK government made very clear that its preferred option was to use medicines regulation to ensure that products that met appropriate standards of safety, quality and efficacy were available to smokers, to help them cut down, to help them to quit and to reduce the harms of smoking. And perhaps I'll come back to the harm reduction argument in just a moment. The results of that public consultation were very clear and very strong from what I would call the public health community, from healthcare professionals, from smoking cessation providers, from public campaigning organisations, that they saw medicines regulation as a very useful framework in which to make products available. Picking up on the point that Martin Seychell made, nicotine replacement therapy is widely available. Its cost is not significantly different from electronic cigarettes or tobacco products. So the idea was not to ban products, but actually to make products that met appropriate standards available to people and widely available to people. Now, the results of that consultation, while very strongly supporting medicines regulation, also raised concerns that these products, which are potentially useful to smokers and for some smokers have allowed them to achieve their goals of reducing smoking, cutting down or quitting, then those products, if we removed them wholesale from the market, would actually have a risk of damaging public health rather than improving public health. So in the UK, we set about a programme of work which has taken some 2 years to complete, and it will be published next month. I was interested in what Professor Bertolini said about publishing the WHO position next month. What we have tried to do in the UK is to bring together an analysis of how these products are used, what's contained in them, what the impact on public health might be from all the data sources we have available. So published and unpublished studies, some work that we have commissioned ourselves on the content of electronic cigarettes and the delivery of nicotine. And we hope to publish all that information next month to inform this very important debate. What we also did, and here's perhaps where I'll come on to the list of questions that Linda talked about, was to look at the current regulatory framework. Professor Bertolini talked about a loophole in the UK. The position in the UK and a significant number of other member states is that they have allowed the general product safety provisions to become the default mechanism for regulation. And what we have done in looking at how that regulation meets the concerns of these products is to look at whether it's a very good fit, whether it manages the risks of electronic cigarettes. Now, Martin Seychell talked about the nature of the General Product Safety Directive. It is a kind of catch-all to catch everything from furniture to toothbrushes. It does capture some important elements. It captures battery safety, for example. It covers things like labelling and the extent to which nicotine must be labelled. But it doesn't capture the content of the product and its safety in delivery, and in particular long-term safety. It doesn't have specific product-specific provisions around advertising. It doesn't manage the risks around providing effective products for people that actually work. I was interested in what Martin Seychell said about balancing risks and benefits, which is what medicines regulation does. That's the basis for the way medicines are regulated. And the comparator here is smoking. So yes, we want to be sure that these products work, and yes, there is limited evidence, but there is evidence that people are finding them useful, successful. There is certainly evidence from a whole range of published studies, including one published today by Ash, which was mentioned earlier, which suggests people use these products in exactly the same way as licensed nicotine replacement therapy. They use them to cut down, they use them to quit. There is some dual use, as there is with licensed nicotine replacement therapy. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence that that's a significant or long-term problem. I was interested in the comments about gateway, and in particular about young people's use. And again, we've looked at what survey evidence is available. The picture is not entirely clear. It is mixed in some areas. But there isn't significant evidence of gateway and young people's use being a significant problem currently. It is a risk, and a risk that needs to be managed going forwards, and it's important to have the right regulatory tools to manage that risk. And we certainly don't have those in the UK in relation to the General Product Safety Directive, but we have been thinking about whether medicines regulation is the right fit and does give the right tools, and that, a decision on that in the UK will be given next month. But just to give you an idea around the capability of medicines regulation, it does have a framework around advertising. It does have limits in the indication on ages that can be used. It does have a requirement that the rational use of the product is promoted, actively promoted. So it does have tools to manage the risk we've identified. It also has requirements around safety, quality and efficacy, but not in a way that can ban products, actually in a way that can enable products to come on the market, to make claims and to be used by smokers for the reason that they are using them, with good product information to tell them about the length of use and how to effectively reduce their smoking and to quit. Now, Linda, you mentioned the European Commission's proposal. The UK's position on that is not finalised. But I did want to say a few words about the two key elements because they have come up in discussion. The first is the warning around nicotine. It's already been mentioned that nicotine is a substance that its use is very well established, its safety profile is very well known, and it's significantly less harmful than addiction to tobacco. So we certainly wouldn't want to see a warning that damaged the reputation of nicotine and its capability to improve public health. So we would like, with the Commission, to look very closely at the warning for nicotine products. We've talked too about levels, and this is an issue which, when I've been talking to regulators around the world, in the States, in Canada, and in other member states, we have struggled with, found it difficult to think about how to apply medicines regulation in these circumstances. Now, before I say any more, I should say I don't have an answer, but I can give you some of the difficulties that we've been struggling with. We wouldn't, for example, say of another active pharmaceutical substance like paracetamol that at a very low level it's not a medicine. We would say at a very low level it's not effective, but we would still want it regulated as a medicine. Paracetamol is a good example because when people take multiple products, they risk overdose. Now, in relation to nicotine, dose is quite a difficult thing to define because users, whether of cigarettes or electronic cigarettes, or indeed nicotine replacement therapy, tend to titrate their use. They use the nicotine until it relieves their craving, and then they use it no more. And that's a very difficult thing to define in law. We too have been struggling to think about how to define it in law. We don't know the answer to that in the UK. We think there may be solutions in thinking about what the levels are. Whether blood levels is the right way to think about them, we're not yet clear. But the UK's position on those elements will be published next month. Now, I did just want also to come to the questions, Linda, that you raised around the cost of regulation and whether that's a barrier, and whether a question that is sometimes raised about cigarettes being less regulated than medicines. Now, in terms of cost of regulation, there are burdensome elements of medicines regulation. It requires good manufacturing practice because these products are consumed in the lung with chemicals that are potentially of a high risk. So we think any regulatory framework should have good manufacturing practice. We think that any regulatory framework should have controls around advertising. And actually more and more, as you start to think of what you would see in an optimal regulatory process, it is, as Martin says, medicines regulation as a good fit. But medicines regulation is not prohibitive. There are existing licensed nicotine replacement therapies. In an industry which the European Parliament briefing said that in 2010 amounted to about 500 million euros, the cost of regulation is relatively small. And many impact assessments that look at the cost of achieving a marketing authorisation talk about between 100 and 200,000 euro annualised over a period of 10 years. So by the size of the industry, it's a relatively small amount. The non-prescription medicines industry in Europe is something like £200 billion Europe-wide. So it's a very small element of that. And finally, Linda, you asked a question about regulating cigarettes in a proportionate way. Now, we think medicines regulation is already proportionate. It has a spectrum from dealing with brand new chemical entities around which we know nothing, to dealing with products that the safety and efficacy profile is very well established. Nicotine is one of those, first licensed in the 1970s. There's been an inhaled form of nicotine around since 1997. We know a lot about the safety profiles of these products. So we can make regulation fit around that in terms of what we know about the safety and how that maps across to newer products coming through. A point was made earlier about the reference product being smoking. Medicines regulation allows us to think about risks and benefits, and when the harms are so great, we may take more risks in the licensing process. We've heard also about the lack of regulation around cigarettes. Well, cigarettes are regulated in terms of they are not allowed to be advertised, they are not allowed to be promoted, and they are subject to high taxation all of which are regulatory strategies designed to drive down the use of these products. Actually, we want to drive people from smoking products to using nicotine replacement therapy products, which, if licensed, they would be just that, another form of nicotine replacement therapy product. So I'll stop there because I think I've addressed the main questions you raised, but very happy to come back to those.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And you answered a lot of the questions, and I'm sure colleagues might have more questions for you. Our next speaker is Dr. Kristiina Pellas from the Finnish Medicines Agency.
Thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak from my point of view. I'm working as an inspector in Finnish Medicines Agency and in practical questions and talking on the phone and giving instructions to private persons and companies.
Can you just make sure, because the big room, the voice carries,
We fully agree with all statement that was made by UK. All the main statements were included there, but we have something to add. And I got 5 questions, which I very shortly answer.
Yes, I'll just say, if people can't hear, they can use the headphones, but it will come through the headphones louder. So people, because it's big room. Yeah.
Okay, the current situation in Finland is that non-nicotine liquids and e-cigarettes are not medicinal products, but nicotine liquids, they are classified as medicinal according to the substance and function and mechanism of action, which is pharmacological. Nicotine is a very good example for a substance which is, according to Medicines Act 3, a typical medicinal substance with receptor activity and pharmacological mechanism of action. Today, it's possible for private persons to buy from also other places than pharmacies medicinal products which contain nicotine. Nicotine products as medicinal products have been sold in Finland for 30 years. But there's one thing, only sold for people over 18, not under, only over 18. And private persons may now today order by post inside the EU legal products which are on the market in other countries. So that means we have made and tried to cope with this classification and borderline questions issue by that way that we compare some nicotine liquids with OTC products, and we allow private persons to order for their private use some nicotine liquids. So it's not totally forbidden, but for 3 months use they may order today. Then one of the questions was how do we see the Article 18 in this new Tobacco Products Directive? That is one thing we see as problematic. It's not clear enough. All those options, A, B, and C, they are not clear enough. The daily dose is not mentioned, and the possibility for a private person to order nicotine as much as they like, if it's uncontrolled substance, is there. So that's why the nicotine should be under control, because otherwise it would be uncontrolled substance and anyone could order it as much as they like. And that's why it's not so useful to talk about milligrams. That was one of our concerns. About the applying for marketing authorization as medicinal product, the legislation is very precise and there are 4 different processes, and of course it will require at least 2 years or more and thousands, over 10,000 € for one application. And also the requirements for clinical trials are really precise in that medicines legislation. We are trying to find a tool to make it exact and easy in these all borderline questions, which take a lot of our time. Last 5 years, hundreds of hours have been spent with these borderline questions. And if you look at the Article 18, there are also other borderline products like liquids, creams, food supplements, which also could be a borderline question. I won't repeat any of our other statements we had. They were already told.
Okay, I'm not sure about from the German. We had the German. Are you able to summarise it rather than read the whole thing? To pick out the key points, because otherwise I'll do it myself. I just don't want to read the whole thing out because it's too long.
I think actually the most important part is the overview of the situation in the member state, and I can read that out, and I think that captures the key issues. So I'll speak on behalf of her. The Federal Institute for Drugs and Medicinal Devices, BfArM, considers the e-cigarette to be a medicinal product due to its pharmacological mode of action, the interaction of the substance, in this case nicotine and cellular constituent, then the name acetylcholine receptors, irrespective of the amount of nicotine. Following the German Medicinal Products Act, the Arzneimittelgesetz, products are clearly classified as tobacco products, cannot be classified as a medicinal product. As e-cigarettes are not smoked, as opposed to being inhaled, sniffed, sucked or chewed, they do not fall under the definition of tobacco products. Therefore, these products are medicinal products and the exception for tobacco products is not applicable. However, this interpretation is disputed. In Germany, the market surveillance is solely within the responsibility of the local federal state authorities. Therefore, the binding decision concerning the classification as well as the demarcation from other products is made by the health authority of the respective federal state, competent for the domicile of the manufacturer, his authorized representative, or the importer. Due to the above-mentioned reasons, some local authorities accept the classification of e-cigarettes as tobacco products or consumer products. Others classify them as medicinal products. Also, national court decisions on this issue are quite contradictory, and irrespective of these explanations, e-cigarettes with medicinal claims concerning tobacco cessation are classified as medicinal products by presentation.
So that's clear then. So I think what we're hearing in Germany is that there's a federal responsibility and a Länder responsibility, and there's some dispute between those different. Yes, and yeah, I mean, on one hand we're told they cannot be classified as medicinal products. Then we're told they are classified as medicinal products. So I think that what we're hearing is very complicated, and that's what we're here to discuss today.
And one of the additional things is that there's a large dispute concerning this issue in Germany, so I assume there's a lot of being careful in the phrasing on what is the current position.
Yeah, I can hear that. So I want to ask, before I open the floor to other people, some questions of the regulators about getting a license. First thing is, I've got totally contradictory advice around whether a nicotine product would require clinical trials. And maybe the Commission wants to comment as well. It seems to me that in although we have a framework for medicines regulation, we have totally different interpretations of how it's applied in different countries. So even with a medicines regulation, you don't really have a single market approach, because some countries are telling me they would ask for clinical trials, others are saying they would not ask for clinical trials. They would accept, as we do with over-the-counter medicines and medicines in long use, some sort of equivalence. I think the German regulator did say that, actually, that they have been looking at this, and in Germany they could accept some kind of, full reference to an already authorised product. So I just, because this issue of, because we have a product on the market, we have e-cigarettes on the market, there's recognition that there should be regulation. The companies themselves are telling us that some of the companies who are more established don't want to be undercut on regulatory matters with less regulation. So we know they're on the market. But if we set up a new regime for authorisation, how are we going to manage that process? We hear from the UK there's a possibility of a light touch regulation. There's different sorts of medicines regulation. Maybe you could explain a little bit more of that. And in the UK you haven't come to a view yet, but are there any other kinds of regulation which could be considered? And maybe the Commission could comment here, because you looked at several options. You came to medicines regulation, but in your impact assessment you went through other options, and maybe you could comment on those other options for us. Maybe we start there, then I'll open the floor to colleagues. Yeah, Jeremy, you want to go first? Yeah.
Certainly one of the things that we've been looking at in the UK is how medicines regulation can be applied proportionately. Now, I should be very clear that our view is that that is entirely within the existing medicines regulatory framework. And as I mentioned earlier, that framework is very broad. It does allow for products which are available in some member states, in supermarkets and in corner shops, and at the other end of the spectrum, brand new substances about which we know very little. And the tools that we use within regulation and the burden is different from those two ends of the spectrum. We do see there is a possibility for an application for a very well-established substance that has had an inhaled formulation since 1997 with a very wide range of use and clear safety data, for other products to rely on that history, but then to demonstrate in relation to their product how it meets particular standards. So we would look, for example, for pharmacokinetic data to show that nicotine is not just present, but it's actually delivered. The user is getting something from it, and it will meet their needs. We have done some testing of products available on the UK market. We have tried to pull together all the testing data that we are aware of, and again, the intention is to publish this next month. And it is clear that products vary very widely in their nicotine content, in their content of other contaminants, in their nicotine delivery, quite regardless of how much nicotine they have in them. And what we would like to achieve is products that meet appropriate standards of safety, quality and efficacy, and people will find effective. Now, there isn't, in looking at other regulatory regimes, there isn't one that has that efficacy test. It's not in tobacco regulation, it's not in the general product safety regulation. If you were to design a new form of regulation, you would certainly want it there, so that people could achieve their goals. We talked, I said, if I may, I'll come back to harm reduction. Because in the UK we've done a lot of work on how to maximise the potential benefits of nicotine replacement therapy. We've had what we describe as a harm reduction, that is reducing the harm from smoking to smokers and those around them, licensed for all forms of nicotine replacement therapy since 2010. Because the approach we have taken is that the harms from smoking are so great that actually even if you can just cut down some cigarettes, there will be a health benefit. Some smoking-related conditions do relate to whether you smoke or not, full stop. Others relate to how much you smoke. So if we can reduce the harm, then we are doing some public health benefit in that process. So we want regulation to be enabling. We want it to be a level playing field that will encourage product development. And we believe it can. If you look at the over-the-counter sector, it is innovative. It has brightly labelled packaging. It changes its products, its pharmaceutical forms all the time. And medicines regulation is a framework that is capable of delivering that. It is not a straitjacket that won't allow product development. It can enable product development by having a level playing field approach.
Only one sentence. Referring to clinical trials, our expert in our medicines agency was concerned about the fact that if they're in e-cigars as well, those medicinal products like chewing gums, it's proved in the clinical trials that the people are able to quit using those medicinal products in the end. The dose is decreasing all the time. So that would be one question, if there is a habit of e-smoking.
So your question was what other regulatory regimes did we look at? Well, we looked across the board at what we have and what we don't have. There's not much in the way of things which could even remotely fit. We looked, for example, at the chemicals legislation, but the chemicals legislation is mostly based on classification and labeling. Nicotine is officially classified as a toxic substance under that legislation. So clearly it doesn't give you any kind of information about effectiveness for a purpose, which is what we're talking about here. We also looked about creating a completely new regime. But when we looked at the characteristics that a new regime would have to contain, things like good manufacturing, a strong evidence base that the product is effective, you need to have a basis for authorization. There needs to be some kind of mechanism to react to incidents, some vigilance mechanism. Well, it would look like a carbon copy of the pharmaceutical legislation. So, in essence, what we would end up with is something which is regulated like a pharmaceutical without being called a pharmaceutical, but the burden would be equivalent. So, and we would, of course, not be able to rely on all the established structures, experience, guidance, case law, and so on that we have with the pharmaceutical legislation. And I will emphasize this point. If we really want this sector to go off in the right direction, there must be enough legal certainty so that the necessary decisions in investment, research, product development can happen. At the moment, we're hearing about a very fragmented market. I would like just to comment on the issue of the thresholds, which was raised earlier about what led the Commission. The Commission primarily acts on an internal market perspective. And what we picked up, as we have heard today, is clear evidence of fragmentation in the market. So the reason why we took the lowest level already regulated as a pharmaceutical in a member state was precisely because of the internal market dimension. We want to harmonize. The legal basis for the proposal is the internal market article. And of course we harmonize on the basis of what is already done by the member states. So clearly, we came to the conclusion that the only real option which would deliver all these objectives would be the pharmaceutical legislation. And just to conclude, because the question was asked on exactly clinical trials and so on. First of all, the dossier which underpins a pharmaceutical product depends on the therapeutic indications which are made. So for every product, you would need to have a dossier which fits the product. Depending on things like indications for use, depending on the exact formulation, what is the product intended for, how is it going to be used, that clearly would then dictate what contents and what kind of trials and other evidence would need to be presented. And this would be the same for any kind of procedure, whether it's a national procedure or a centralized procedure.
I see Glenis Willmott wants to ask a question.
I mean, nobody wants to take these products off the market. That's obvious because they have a huge benefit. So how long would that process take? If these were classed as a medicinal product, how long would it, in years, months, whatever, how long? 18 months doesn't seem very long to me. So how long are we talking about exactly?
This is, I think, a question the answer to which depends a lot on exactly what information the industry has. Because we hear a lot on the one hand about these products are remarkably effective, thousands of people have found them to be effective, they work. Well, if that's really the case, and we hope that is really the case, then it should be relatively straightforward to collect the evidence and turn the evidence into a dossier. So that's the first question. How confident is the industry that the evidence really pans out in the end? So that's the first question which I can't answer, the industry has to answer, because we hear a lot about this. Secondly, it's a question of how, as I said in my introduction, is the industry thinking about these products as a product where they need to demonstrate safety, efficacy, and therefore have the necessary management systems in place, or do they intend to market these products in the future to circumvent bans on tobacco? Now, that is a fundamental decision that the industry has to take. If we really want to have a proper regulation for this industry with long-term prospects, I would certainly recommend the first option. Playing around with deficiencies in current legislation, I don't think is really going to establish much in terms of legal certainty. So that is a key question. I can't answer those questions, but I think there are probably, the people in the industry are able to answer those questions. Now, exactly whether it will take 18 months or longer, that's something which is up for discussion, and that's exactly what is being discussed in Parliament and Council. But we need to have a basis for that decision, because at some point we have to reach a conclusion.
It's partly a question and partly a comment. The representatives from the medicines agencies here are from countries where you can buy medicines outside of a pharmacy, but I believe it's only about half the countries in the European Union where that is possible. So, would that mean that e-cigarettes would, in some countries, not in all, obviously probably not in the UK or Finland, be only available in pharmacies, which would, of course, make them less available than tobacco?
Perhaps I could pick that up because it is, as Martin said earlier, a national decision. Member states can choose to have additional legal categories which control sale and supply. As you rightly say, about half member states have a general sale list capability. Importantly, though, if and when this legislation is passed, it is a directive which will require transposition into national legislation. Member states could choose at that time to set up a legal category specifically for nicotine replacement therapy products if they so wished.
Yeah, I saw this gentleman here again. I've forgotten your name, and you say again where you're from. Yeah, maybe slowly because I didn't catch it the first time.
Riccardo Polosa from Italy. Okay.
You're in what quality, what capacity are you here?
I'm a scientific advisor of LIAF, the Italian League at Anti-Smoking. Okay. Yeah, sure. I just wanted to make a comment about fragmentation of the market. In fact, the fragmentation of the market has not been a bad thing at all. It's been generated a very dynamic environment that has created new products to be even more effective than those that were on the market 3 years ago. Our research that is being quoted here today refers to old underperforming models that were in production in 2009-2010. We are now performing research on new models, and the quit rates are doubling. That means to me that in a dynamic environment we can make profit of the benefit of these products. My worry is that pharmaceutical framework, I know most of you are coming from that background, so it's understandable you want to sell your product. But we really need to take into account that the pharmaceutical framework is sometimes very slow. And I come from pharmaceutical industries trials that takes years and years before you end up with some outcomes. And that needs to be taken into account. What I'm saying is we need some sort of regulation. Everybody wants a regulation. But we really need to start being creative and try to think of something different. It may be something that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, some bits and pieces, but it is also clear that it can come from from the general product regulation that we already have. Although in your initial overture, you mentioned, no, that's good only for clothing, furniture. That's not entirely true. We need to apply some bits and pieces of pharmaceutical industry and create a new novel entities together with the electronic cigarette industries. I'm sure they have a lot of answers to you. They can provide a lot of information. They've already done their surveys and they can funnel a lot of information to the Commission. That's very helpful. And we as a scientists, we can do the same thing. We can provide help to you.
I think that was more an opinion than because I'm keen that we move on to the next section, unless any of my colleagues have any questions to the regulators. Yes, Mrs. Willmott.
I would actually like to ask the gentleman who's just spoken if he has, and I'm not being rude here, I just want to know, does he have any relationship with these e-cigarette manufacturers at all?
You'll be asked to make a declaration of interest.
Yes, I have. It's impossible not to have a conflict of interest because even a medic has a conflict of interest with the pharmaceutical industries. I cannot see anything wrong. I mean, I can see the... No, I'm very honest, of course. But I think what I'm doing here with you guys, we are making history. We are saving lives, we are changing things, and we need to know that. Regardless of, conflict of interest, everybody's got a conflict of interest. Even the people there,
leave it there.
Ethically speaking, they must have a conflict of interest.
If people are working with industry, it's helpful they say so.
No, not that.
Clear, we know people do, but they should tell us when they take the floor. Yes, I see at the back, Florence Berteletti would tell us what her interests are in this. Yeah.
Yes. My name is Florence Berteletti Kemp. I'm representing here the Smoke-Free Partnership, and the aim of the Smoke-Free Partnership is the implementation of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. My question is to the regulators who are all sitting at the table. First, I would like to make a comment, and the comment is that this discussion is taking place at a time where member states are at different levels of implementation of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. What that means is that, for instance, in a country like the UK, which has largely implemented the FCTC, 7 out of 10 smokers actually want to quit smoking. But I doubt that that would be the case in a country like the Czech Republic. So my question to you, if we're looking at the consumers, and if some of the assumption is that the e-cigarette industry are suddenly public health specialists who would resolve the problem of tobacco, my question to you is, when you're regulating e-cigarettes, are you taking into account the level of implementation of the FCTC and the impact that this has on actually the citizens in your countries?
I'm going to make that the last question, then we really will move on. Yeah. Who wants to?
I can make it. I think what Florence was pointing out is a very important point, because I think at the moment we have been talking about the e-cigarettes and the use of e-cigarettes in a context which is not necessarily the same in so many countries in the European Union. So we have a very heterogeneous pattern of implementation of the Framework Convention. We have a very heterogeneous level of consumption of tobacco. So we need also to check whether these basic conditions within which the industry operates modify also the behavior of people, the perception, and a number of things. So this points out once again the fact that we need additional country-specific evidence on the effectiveness of certain measures with respect to the tobacco cessation. I mean, even considering, a very strong effectiveness, I would like to stress once again that, as everybody was saying, that we need a regulation which, put this market into some sort of context, which is not the case at the moment.
Okay, we're going to stop that session there, and we're going to move to the next one. And we need to swap the panel of speakers. The other speakers are welcome to take seats. I think there are seats being vacated there. You can take your name with you and leave space for the new names. So if the next, if our three speakers, maybe is it Holy? Is he here as well? Yes. Yeah. But all the everybody's for the next four speakers are here.
Is there any place you want us to sit there?
Yes, fine. You sit here. Yes, fine. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's where you find space. There's no set space. Okay. So the next part was to take some evidence from the medical world. I'm particularly interested to know about impacts because I heard what the gentleman said there, the Italian gentleman there. But one thing that does concern me is putting something on the market which people are inhaling, and we haven't got a long-term study of the impact on their health. And it's you need a regulatory framework to make sure the studies happen as well. I'm also interested in the vapours. What is in the vapours? Because I've seen adverts for e-cigarettes showing people smoking next to their baby in Germany on the website. So you hold your baby, you smoke your cigarette. Is that something you would recommend? Is that something that's safe? Some people have told me the vapours contain nothing but steam. I've heard this morning that this is not the case. We need to know what those vapours contain, because there's a whole issue of should people be smoking in public places using these products. So I think we need to understand this. We're getting lots of contradictory evidence. And so we're going to give you the floor one at a time. No, you are coming out at the end, sir. You have the speaking time at the end. But at the moment, we're listening to the doctors first. Yeah. So first of all, then we're going to hear from Professor Francesco Blasi, who's the president of the European Respiratory Society. So, Professor Blasi.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. Is another Italian voice from on the e-cigarettes from the European Respiratory Society in this case. The ERS is a medical organization with about 12,000 members all over the world, and our mission is principal on the protecting the health of EU citizens. So the fight against tobacco use and the support of program of smoking cessation is in our mission. So this is one of the points that I want to make. When you look to a controversial problem, sometimes you need some analytical analysis and some philosophy maybe. And clearly we have, in a controversial issue, we have things we know that we know, there are things that we know that we don't know, and there are clearly unknown knowns. This is very important because we have to set the scene. And clearly the problem on e-cigarettes is that we know only few things. And we know that there is a delivery system for nicotine to the respiratory system, that it contains something that is different by only nicotine and water. And one of the problems is clearly, as already underlined in this session, the quality control. You know, in Italy we have 3 cases of explosion of e-cigarette related to the manufacturing. So the problem is that the quality control is not just an issue, a secondary issue, but is a very important issue. And on the other side, we know that the market is the market. We have a lot of selling of these e-cigarettes. And clearly is a so huge market that even the tobacco industry is now investing in this market. So this is a very important issue for European Respiratory Society at least. So what we don't know. Clearly the effect on the lung, particularly in long term, there are no studies on long-term use of e-cigarettes. We have some short study, and Riccardo Polosa has published some of these studies, and there are at least 7 clinical trials ongoing. If you go to the clinicaltrials.gov, you can find out 7 studies ongoing, 4 from Italy. on e-cigarettes. And two of these are long-term studies. So at the end of the day, something is moving. We don't know very well the extent of nicotine uptake in the lung, through the lung, and clearly the emission and health impact of vaporization is not clear. We have the presentation of Dr. Bertolini about the possible issue about this point. And clearly in Italy they found benzene in the vapor and heavy metals too. So something is there. And clearly, the health benefits are not so clear. We have positive and negative results, so the evidence is still not so clear. The ancient physician said, primum non nocere. First, do not harm. This is one of the points. And clearly, this is very true if you look to an issue where the scientific evidence is insufficient, inconclusive, or uncertain, like in this case. Clearly, this led to reasonable grounds for concern about the safety and the efficacy. And so this is one of the points that should lead to the solution, the proposed solution. I think that there is a clear need to have independent studies. And I think EU should support these kind of studies. Be independent, funded by EU. And we need clinical trials. We need studies on behavior and on the impact on the behavior of children and young people and young children, and clearly post-marketing surveillance studies. Because while e-cigarettes have a potential to reduce tobacco-related harm by helping smokers to cut down or quit, an appropriate regulatory framework is required for the sale and the use of e-cigarettes. Because we have to ensure that the e-cigarettes are safe, the quality must be assured, and also the efficacy in helping the smoker to cut down and quit should be demonstrated. On the other side, I think we need to regulate the market because I think that it should be effective and should be targeted on the smokers as a way of cutting down and quitting, and does not appeal to non-smokers, in particular children and young people. And this need to be, the use should be limited in workplaces and public places to limit second-hand exposure to the vapor exhaled by the users, and to ensure that their use does not undermine smoking prevention and cessation by reinforcing the normalcy of cigarette smoking. So I think this is a call, really a call for independent study and for the, the engagement of EU in funding new studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker on cardiovascular effects is Dr. Charlotta Pisinger, who is a senior research fellow at the Research Centre for Prevention and Health in Copenhagen. Yes.
And I'm also a medical doctor, and I have nothing to declare. So our scientific knowledge of e-cigarettes is comparable to the knowledge we had of smoking about 100 years ago. People have used e-cigarettes for a few years, they are often young, and at this age incidence of cardiac disease is very low. Our fear is that there is a time delay in health consequences. Just like with cigarettes, it might take decades before we see the health damage. Unfortunately, we are not able to give an estimate of the long-term consequences of e-cigarettes on the cardiovascular system, as this would be fortune-telling. We need hundreds of thousands of users and many more years of use in order to see if there are any long-term effects of e-cigarettes on cardiovascular health. So what worries us? Apart from nicotine, both toxic and carcinogenic components have been found in e-cigarettes, And even though concentrations have been low, often called traces only, the inhaled vapor undergoes changes in the human lung. An accumulation of chemicals can occur over many years. What we know today is based on self-reports and small experimental studies of the acute effects of cigarettes on the cardiovascular system. Some of these studies have found significantly increased plasma nicotine, heart rate, and blood pressure. Other studies have found no change in plasma nicotine, heart rate, and blood count markers. This probably reflects that both the dosage of nicotine and the content of other chemicals vary markedly across the products. It has been found that there is poor consistency between actual nicotine content and the amount stated at the label, and labels without nicotine have been found to contain nicotine. The US Food and Drug Administration have received an increasing number of adverse events experienced due to use of e-cigarettes, and we suppose that there is an underreporting as people do not consider e-cigarettes as drugs. Cardiovascular events such as rapid heartbeat, chest pain, hypotension, and hospitalization for congestive heart failure have been reported. In some cases, it has been assessed that a causal relationship is probable. In a recently published paper, researchers analyzed original posts from online e-cigarette forums. They found more than 400 chat threads about symptoms associated with use of e-cigarettes. Now we are talking about the users, and surprisingly, in 8 out of 10 cases, people report negative symptoms. When it comes to symptoms from the cardiovascular system, a large majority reported negative symptoms from the chest, most frequently pain, tightening, and pressure. This is definitely not scientific evidence, but it is a valuable supplement to the picture postcard the manufacturers of e-cigarettes present. Light cigarettes are marketed as safe, but they were marketed as safe, but turned out to be extremely harmful. Exactly the same arguments as shame and harm reduction were used then, and smokers who contemplated quitting, they switched instead to a light cigarette. Today, e-cigarettes are sold as safe cigarettes. There is no doubt that e-cigarettes are less harmful than cigarettes, but cigarettes are the most harmful product on the market, so everything is less harmful. Also, is harm reduction good enough? Don't we want smokers to quit? It has been a long process, but we have halved the smoking prevalence in many European countries. And 3 out of 4 smokers state that they want to quit. Let us help them to quit. That would save about 700,000 EU citizens' lives every year, many of these dying of cardiovascular disease, the #1 killer in Europe. Unfortunately, there are no randomized controlled trials showing that e-cigarettes are effective in helping smokers to quit. A large survey of almost 2,000 current and recently former smokers found that many smokers have tried alternative tobacco products, most frequently e-cigarettes, but that use of these products wasn't associated with higher quit rates. Maybe e-cigarettes are not the magic bullet we dream of. I hope they are efficacious, but we are not sure. Let us also remember that kids are fast learners and we are their role models. They can't see the difference between smoking and vaporing of e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes taste good, of strawberries or chocolate, and it will be very easy to learn to smoke. Therefore, let's not repeat the errors of the past, as with cigarettes and light cigarettes. The European Society of Cardiology proposes that e-cigarettes must be tightly regulated by national and EU authorities, preferably as both a tobacco and a medical product. If shown to be efficacious and safe, e-cigarettes could be an excellent alternative smoking cessation aid to standard nicotine products.
Thank you very much. So we move to our last speaker in this section this afternoon is Dr. Jean-Francois Etter from the University of Geneva.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm a professor of public health at the University of Geneva, and I spent most of the past 20 years studying tobacco dependence and smoking prevention. I've developed instruments to measure tobacco dependence, and I've also conducted some of the very first studies on electronic cigarettes. I've published 4 such studies, and 3 others will be published very soon. As for conflicts of interest, I have not had any conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry in the past 8 years, never anything with the tobacco industry. The e-cig people paid for my plane ticket to visit them in China. I visited their factories there. It was extraordinarily instructive. I was asked to speak about the addictiveness of electronic cigarettes. I guess this one. Voilà. Well, there are several definitions of what addiction is. A conventional, very well accepted definition is that addiction is the compulsive use of a substance in spite of the adverse consequences of that use on the user's health or family life or social life. Now, remember there are 2 very important components, not just compulsive use, but adverse consequences. For the moment, as you understand, the adverse consequences element is not documented, almost not at all, for e-cigarettes. Now, for e-cigarettes to be addictive, they need to deliver nicotine, right? So this is a study that we published already 2 years ago. It's the first ever study of cotinine, the main metabolite of nicotine, in regular vapors, not in people who discovered e-cigarettes in the lab in the morning, but in people who actually are regular vapors. And we showed in this study that some of them, not all of them, but at least some of them, have levels of cotinine similar to level observed in smokers and twice as high as levels usually observed in users of nicotine gums and patches. Maybe not all users have such levels. This is the second study published, available to date, of regular vapors by Tom Eisenberg and Andrea Van Zinkel, and they show those is the first part of the graph on the left, up left, showing that nicotine level in the blood substantially increase after vaping for some time. Also, another indication of the importance of nicotine, it comes from surveys of vapors, some conducted by ourselves, and these studies very consistently, amazingly, show that almost all vapors, 97 to 100% of them, use nicotine-containing liquids, juices as they call them. So we are speaking about a nicotine delivery device, not about a flavor delivery device or anything. It's nicotine. Another thing that's very important for you to understand is the concept of pharmacokinetics. It's extremely important. The addictiveness of a substance does not depend only on the molecule itself. It depends mainly on the speed of delivery to the brain and on the speed of activation of the reward system in the brain, right? So tobacco cigarettes, they deliver nicotine to the lung and then to the arterial blood and very rapidly to the brain, and they're very addictive. A nicotine gum delivers nicotine much slower and is much less addictive. And a nicotine patch, even much slower, and nobody is addicted to the nicotine patch, right? So speed of delivery is crucial. Now, from the elements that I've seen, published and unpublished, the speed of nicotine delivery by electronic cigarettes is closer to the speed of the gum and inhaler, a bit quicker, and much slower than for cigarettes. So from this, we could derive that they will be a bit more addictive than gums and inhalers, but less addictive than cigarettes. But this is a hypothesis that needs to be tested. Now, even if they were addictive, is it a public health problem, right? Is it something you need to regulate just because they're addictive? As I said, the adverse consequences of long-term vaping are not yet documented. And anyway, it's a lot safer than smoking, right? Especially if e-cigarettes, and there's good evidence for that, contrary to what has been presented to you to date. I think, again, that the science has not been fairly presented to you today. There are strong indications, including randomized trials by Riccardo Polosa, who is here, showing that e-cigarettes help people quit smoking, actually. And why wouldn't they, right? They deliver a lot of nicotine. They have a tobacco flavor, all the gesture, the throat hit, very important. That specific feeling in the throat that people feel when they inhale nicotine, they deliver it. So, of course, they will help people quit smoking. Then also, compulsive use of e-cigarettes can be treated. It can be treated with nicotine patches or with varenicline or with counseling by a doctor or a psychologist. And also, we must compare with addiction to the nicotine gums. 1% of all smokers who quit smoking with a nicotine gum remain addicted to the gum. This represents thousands of people in the European Union who are addicted to the gum, and most probably 1/3 of all the nicotine gums that are sold to people who are addicted to the gum. Okay? Is it a public health problem? You probably not even ever heard of it. Right? I studied addiction to the nicotine gum in a couple of papers. It exists, of course. It is not a public health problem. You even have never heard of it. Is it a gateway to smoking in young people? This has been presented to you as a fact. It is not a fact at all. I'm not saying that it's not going to occur. I'm just saying that the available evidence shows that very few teenagers will use e-cigarettes, and there are no data published to this day at all of conversion from trying. Of course, they will try a lot of things in their environment, but there are no data at all on conversion from trying any cigarettes to getting addicted to it. It may occur, of course, but it's not documented. And nicotine gums flavored with fruit flavors are not a gateway to smoking in kids. But, of course, there is an urgent need for more research on the use of e-cigarettes by kids. Are they used, the e-cigarettes, to inhale illicit drugs? Well, you can get artificial cannabis flavors online. You can also get models of e-cigarettes in which you place leaves of tobacco or leaves of cannabis through which the vapor goes through, and then you can inhale vapors. In surveys, very few vapors admit to inhaling cannabis, and I know of no published report of the use of e-cigarettes by cocaine or heroin users. But if it delivers to the lung, they will discover it, of course. Now, as a perspective, the only thing that we can say about this is that research is urgent. Please favor research, fund it, encourage it. It's very important. In this paper, published already 2 or 3 years ago in tobacco control, we established a research agenda with another of our researchers, a list of all the studies that need to be done, electronic nicotine delivery systems, a research agenda, and I've also, I have also written a book where I summarize a number of recommendations for policymakers, research needs, and I made an honest attempt of fairly representing the science on this topic, which you have not been presented with today. So there's a need for research on all these topics, and it's urgent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to our 3 speakers. So we'll take questions now. You'll be at the end. So we'll have the questions to the doctors, and then we'll take you at the end. Is that okay? So I've noticed I answered my question about vapor. What's in the vapor, and is the vapor safe for other people around them? I don't know if somebody wants to answer that question before we ask other questions.
Well, in the vapors, you have propylene glycol, which is not toxic, as has been said before. It's generally recognized as safe grass, as they say. It's used widely in medications and in drugs and in food, in everything. You can even inject it. It's approved for injection. Of course, what is not known is whether it is safe when you inhale 150 puffs a day, which is the average observed in vapors, during several years. This is not yet known. Then you have water. Then you have nicotine, which at the dose, what you have been presented with is the poisoning symptoms. When people use very large amount of nicotine, they can get poisoned. That's true. But in the amounts used by NRT users, I mean nicotine patches and gum users or vapors, it's not toxic. And then you have flavors or food flavors. Food flavors are not made to be inhaled; they are made to be swallowed, right? So the long-term effects of inhaling food flavors is not known. About the carcinogens, it's been repeatedly said today. What people did not say and should be said is that the carcinogens are found in the same level in nicotine gums and patches, and they are allowed for sale, and it's trace level, right? These detection equipments, they can detect traces of something. It doesn't mean that it's dangerous for your health. And also about the diethylene glycol, it's been repeatedly said also the FDA, diethylene glycol, well, they found it in one very marginal brand that is withdrawn from the market, right? Well, now I've visited these companies in China and I know that what they manufacture is not according to any standard, right? So there's a need for quality control for sure, but please.
I'm going to ask Professor Blasi. So you first. He asked first about this issue, and then thank you.
Just to, my second son is asthmatic, and he was in a library with some friends using e-cigarette, and he had an asthma attack. Maybe not a cause, any direct cause effect, but what I have in my family is that I had an asthma attack. So we don't know really what happened when you are exposed to passive or second-hand smoking from e-cigarette. And I think it needs more research. I fully agree, because there are so many brands around that could be a good thing, as Polosa stated. But on the other side, the quality control is lacking. So what is really present in this e-cigarette, we don't know really, because in the different brand you can find different things. In Italy we have the intervention from the judge that decided to block the selling of some of the batches and the brands because of the finding of benzene and whatever. So I think we need really a tight regulation on the quality control, and then an appropriate regulation on the use of e-cigarettes.
Well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a regulatory framework, and none of you have said what you think that should be. But I'm going to go back to...
I just want to supplement. To my knowledge, there has not only been found toxins, but also metals and silicates and the carcinogenic substances. What we sometimes forget is that we must discriminate between eating something, small amount of something that will do no harm at all because it will pass through the body and in the toilet the day after, and that we are inhaling something that is that ends in the lungs and will never come up again. And if you inhale something many times daily, and people tell that many vapors I know of e-cigarettes, they tell that actually they are smoking maybe a little bit more now because it's so easy to turn on the e-cigarette so they can smoke everywhere. And the amounts that accumulate over time might be a health concern. I don't know this, nobody knows this, but we have to take it to concern.
Yes, one thing that was shown in almost a school way today is something you must be very well aware of when you learn about e-cigarettes. You've been shown a very good demonstration today of what cherry-picking studies can do. You cannot represent science by just cherry-picking the negative studies and presenting this as science. It's not fair. For instance, you've been presented with adverse events. Of course, if you collect data on an e-cigarette forum that is for people to record adverse events, you will find them. And also, hospitalization and withdrawal symptoms, nicotine withdrawal symptoms can be usually confounded with side effects of e-cigarettes. These conditions could be pre-existing or they can be due to nicotine withdrawal.
I've got colleagues who want to ask questions who have to leave, so maybe we should... Mrs. Willmott, yeah.
Sorry, I do have to go to a shadows meeting on clinical trials, actually. Just on this particular topic, I agree with you that everybody, I think, would agree we need a lot more research, absolutely. I think what you've said is very, very interesting. My question is, though, we all want to see e-cigarettes used to prevent smoking, you know, to help people quit. But if it is a smoking cessation product, why can it not be regulated in the same way? Why should it not be regulated in the same way as all other smoking cessation products? I don't understand what the problem is with that.
The problem with that is that the threshold is quite high, and you've heard about leveling the playing field. Yes, but what they mean is leveling the playing field with the nicotine gums and patches, and this is in the advantage of the pharma industry, who doesn't want to see a competitor, right? The current legislation allows nicotine at these two extremes at the distribution. You cannot look at things with a blind eye, right? There's also the other hand here where nicotine is allowed almost unrestricted in the most toxic and deadly product that kills not thousands but hundreds of thousands of people a year in the EU only. So leveling the playing field, okay, but with all nicotine suppliers. Okay, so if the current legislation that allows nicotine only in tobacco and in medications arguably kills many people because it leaves them no choice. Gums and patches are not very attractive. People don't use them. They use them for a few weeks. I've studied myself the long-term effects of these nicotine gums and patches. It's very, very small, actually. With e-cigarettes, you have something that can make a difference. I've worked in this field for 20 years. I think it can make a difference. If you regulate it as a medication, this will profit the pharma industry, who doesn't want a competitor, big tobacco, who are the only ones who can actually comply, and eliminate all other nicotine suppliers. That's what is going to occur.
I don't quite see that.
I think that the regulation should be done, for sure, because at the end of the day, we need an appropriate regulation of these devices, because unless there is no control of everything. So I fully agree. I can understand why there is such a resistance to regulate the use. It's not saying that we are banning anything. I fully agree with the Commissioner. We are not banning anything, and we are not proposing to ban anything, because I think that e-cigarette could be a very important device for stop smoking. But on the other side, we had to regulate the use, because unless it's, maybe lack of quality control, lack of evidence, and lack of surveillance of adverse events. So at the end of the day, I think the regulation should be on the table. Then we can decide how to regulate and how tough we have to regulate. But this is another point.
The problem for us is we have to move very quickly. Because I'm interested, you said you visited factories in China. You've seen a lack of control. There are problems in manufacture of e-cigarettes. You told us you visited and there were problems. Our problem is, what is the regulatory framework that sorts this out? If it's not medicines regulation, what is that regulatory framework? And if we leave it, some people here are lobbying. I know they're lobbying, because I've seen all the lobbying. Let's leave it for today. Let's not do it now. Let's put it to one side. That's because they get 5 more years then on the market with their products. We're not daft. I've been around a long time in politics, so they are now lobbying very hard to get it out of this regulation. But we need a solution, because even if you want it to work for harm reduction, we have to have a regulatory framework. If you don't want medicines, what is that regulatory framework you want?
Quality control is necessary. I think we have a special situation here that if you don't have competitors to the tobacco industry and to cigarettes, then you leave those thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are addicted to nicotine. They need nicotine. You leave them in the hands of the tobacco industry. They will not turn to an RT. But I would limit it to quality control for the moment, to make it available as largely as possible to people, not as a medicine, because this will drive out of the market too many of the actors. And this will decrease consumption too much. What we need is a way to protect the consumer from products that have metals and things in them. But we need to have these products as widely available as possible. And I fear that if they are regulated as medicinal products, they will not be available as widely as possible, and the result is that thousands of people will die.
Okay, have any of my Mrs. Ries and Mrs. Taylor, and then I'm going to move on. I want to make sure we give our last speaker time and time for questions.
I'm not sure if the right word to use of the feeling that I get from the meeting, ambivalent or sometimes hypocritical or even schizophrenic, because we all know that the whole discussion seems to be about authorizing tobacco in a world, an ideal world where we know it should be banned, and Commissioner Borg said so. If it had to be on the market today, it would be banned. And at the same time, we're talking here about hindering or severely hindering the E6 in a global picture where they're good as long as it's a cessation or tool or an alternative. So I find this a bit schizophrenic. For me, at the end of the day, every cigarette that's not smoking is a battle that we've won. So it doesn't matter for me, because we're here, on est en train de chipoter, we're thinking about is it 1 or 2 carcinogenic that are in E6, where we know there's 93 in real tobacco. So I don't care if it's even 10, as long as it's that much way below what's in real tobacco. So as you said, Mrs. Rapporteur, what's important is to adjust the best framework to the ESIC, but forget the taboo and forget what seems to be the tendency here about hindering that so much. I would like to ask a very maybe utopic questions to the expert scientists that we have here. Tobacco kills 1 addict out of 2. That's the figure. It's not politics. So what could be, when we will have le recul, when we'll have the years to know, when science will agree with science, which will maybe never, but one day, what could be the results of e-smoking? Is it going to be, in the worst case, is it going to be out of 10, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20? So are we really adjusting here the best way to address that legal framework that we have to come up with?
Rebecca at the same time, and then she can.
The question was, because there seems to be some confusion as to how e-cigarettes are used, because from the users who have spoken to me, they do not stop their nicotine habit, they stop smoking and they switch to an e-cigarette. So sometimes I think people have said, oh, it doesn't help you quit, but it depends what you mean by quit. If you mean stop smoking, yes. If you mean stop a nicotine habit, no, and I think it's important to make this difference. I'd also be interested to know, because I have heard that some people do completely stop the nicotine habit by using e-cigarettes, and I wondered if there is, what data there is, perhaps there isn't yet. Because from what I've heard from users, it's mostly people stop smoking and switch to e-cigarettes. But apparently some people do completely give up. So
there are no follow-up data. Longitudinal studies, we're conducting one. We're having one. I already have 1,000 people in a follow-up study. So we'll know the answers to all these questions. But as I said, nicotine addiction in itself is not the problem. The problem is smoking, actually, that kills people, not nicotine.
I think I would like to see your question. The first question is quite interesting, because at the end of the day, if you are the 1 out of 10, your rate of death is 100%. So at the end of the day, the main point is certainly you reduce the harm, but you have to go to the zero problem. So the zero should be stop smoking. So on the other side, the report from people that reduce smoking using the e-cigarette is quite interesting, and I think at the end of the day, it underlines the need of clinical trials, because at the end of the day, we, as a scientist, we don't accept, cohort study looking just to what the patient report, but we want to have a clinical trial. So I think the evidence is different in terms of, so we need clinical trials and we need independent clinical trials.
Okay, I'm going to take our next speaker now, because I want to make sure he has time, and we have then time at the end for questions, and I don't want to squeeze out our last speaker. So if other speakers, they can stay, and I'm going to hand the floor now to our final speaker, because we did have a request to listen to the voice of the consumer, and Rebecca Taylor has just said that some users are telling me they don't want to quit. Using nicotine, they want to quit smoking. So there are some different debates about this. So I'm very pleased that you're here.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to this workshop. As we are short on time, as already mentioned, we would like you to focus on your prepared slides, which summarize the position of the consumers. First topic, the miracle drug that cures the addiction it's suspected to cause. We state, e-cigarettes are nothing less than an alternative to the tobacco cigarette. We are not planning to stop anything and do not plan to change our behavior. E-cigarettes cannot be a medicinal product. Why is that? As by definition, a medicinal product has a goal to cure. The e-cigarette is not curing anything, but rather replacing a proved harmful addiction with far less dangerous enjoyment. An easy understandable example, imagine to replace coffee with tea in case you have a weak stomach. There are already many studies and investigations concerning the e-cigarette. Unfortunately, they are mostly ignored or interpreted negatively, even if they prove that e-cigarettes are much safer than tobacco cigarettes. By purpose, topic 2, the unsafe haven. We ask you, where is the proof that an e-cigarette, respectively the e-liquids, are safer if they are sold in the pharmacy or as a medicinal product? Really, anyone who can, please tell us. Reality is in big contrast to this thoughtless suggestion. A pharmaceutical product does not need any dangerous substance markings. Did you really think about it? Somebody may say, it's medicine and I bought it in a pharmacy, so it must be safe and I do not need to be cautious. Is this really better? To sum up, the e-cigarette cannot be a pharmaceutical product as stated earlier. It is not for withdrawal, does not cure anything, and therefore is not part of nicotine replacement therapy. Point 3, we call it nicotine guesswork. There is no evidence for the addictiveness of nicotine standing alone. On the other hand, there are studies which nourish the perception that the addictiveness of nicotine alone is insignificant. Where is the evidence that nicotine alone is the addiction critical substance? Again, repeating and repeating non-proven arguments will not make them true. Or it is done also by purpose. The horror on bottles. We state nicotine is safe in usual concentrations. There is also enough tolerance by far for not completely perfect devices. Inaccuracy may ever happen when man is involved, may it be in a pharmacy or wherever. Eating tobacco is as dangerous as drinking e-liquids, or eating grated nutmegs, or drinking toilet cleaner, which comes, by the way, in nice, colorful designed bottles most suitable for children. As harmful substances are already regulated within the European Union, there is no place for this in the Tobacco Directive 2, or it is done by purpose. Our position regarding the often repeated argument that vaping is the door to real smoking for minors. There is no evidence, no proof, nor even an indication that this assumption is true, and we will not accept this theory unless proven otherwise. On the contrary, the majority of e-cigarette users have been smoking for a long time and are definitely no minors. Apart from that, e-cigarettes are not at all cool, but expensive at start and annoy with rather intricate handling. Once again, why are unproved statements repeated so often? Repeating does not make a lie true. Or is it, you may guess, done by purpose? Next point, legal impossibilities. E-cigarettes and e-liquids must not be regulated in the TPD2 as they contain no tobacco at all. Nicotine can be synthesized as well and will be the same substance. Or to put it in a picture, Coca-Cola is not coffee. It is absolutely illegal to force a product which is proven to be so much less harmful into stricter regulations than a tobacco cigarette, which is available almost everywhere. We do harm no others. So, how dare you taking away the basic right of self-responsibility from the European citizen? Everyone, I think including the Commission, knows that the directive will most probably fail at court later with regard to the e-cigarette, but it is ignored. By purpose? I think I switched one. All right. Sorry again. So here we are. The real alternative we call sheet 7. E-cigarettes could help, we mentioned this number before, to reduce 600,000 deaths from tobacco smoke each year in Europe. But this will not work as a pharmaceutical product. E-cigarettes are means for enjoyment and stimulation, very similar to a cup of coffee, and exist due to their freedom of availability, taste, and big variety of flavors. This will be gone as a pharmaceutical product and kill today's known e-cigarette. We, the consumers, the citizens of Europe, do not want this to happen. This great opportunity for harm reduction has not to be missed. Second to last point, vapor lies and nitrosamines. Despite of the highly sophisticated testing methods, the FDA was not able to quantify the nitrosamines they found in a few e-liquids. And they were not able to determine even half the amount that is necessary to technically call it nitrosamines. The publication was forbidden by US court. Even if we take this so-called study into consideration, we have to compare as follows. 1 milliliter e-liquid has up to 40 times less nitrosamines than a pharmaceutical nicotine gum, and up to 15,000 less than one cigarette. Last but not least, to make it short, tell us, are all teddy bears dangerous because one was on the rapid alert system? Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. An addictive substance, and that's why people need the nicotine if they've been smokers. So I think I'm not a bit confused by that statement, that nicotine is not addictive. I don't think there's much evidence for that.
Don't ask me especially which study this confirms, because we are working in a small group. We are not scientists, we are just consumers. We are doing this out of our normal job, but we are looking at the surveys and studies very well. My colleague had some kind of bunch of studies, approximately 630 pages. So far to the argument, there are no studies regarding the e-cigarettes.
Well, okay. Are there any questions to speak? If not, I'll take. Well, first of all, I saw Mr. Bertolini from the WHO, and then I saw somebody over here. Yeah. So I'll take you next, and then this gentleman here. Yeah. Please.
Thank you, Linda. Just a very general comment. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, the last speaker who said that he represents the consumers and the citizens of Europe in the European Parliament. It's quite a strong statement, so I think you would be a little bit more modest in your statement. would be helpful, I think. And, with respect, I wanted to make a general comment on the purpose of all this discussion. I mean, we are all here, I think. I don't need to remind anybody. But, I think we are all here to fight against smoking and to make sure that 700,000 deaths are preserved. And I think a word of prudence with respect to the e-cigarettes use and effectiveness in achieving this aim, I think it's quite necessary and appropriate. Nobody has the exclusiveness on the interpretation of the studies. There are several uncertainties which are around, and also Professor Etter was pointing out that there are uncertainties. So his, attitude towards stressing the absolute truth of some of his statements, I think he should be taken with a little bit of care. And I think we should be a little bit prudent in these things. So I think the public health community, as represented by WHO, and of course there are others who represent the public health community, but we are the international organizations with this task, is aiming to implement the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in all its aspects. And when this has happened, like in Brazil, for instance, which, by the way, is forbidding the use of e-cigarettes, just in parentheses, the prevalence of smoking has decreased by half in a few years' time, in a long-term perspective. So we are talking about, this is our objective. E-cigarettes might contribute to it, but it's not a panacea. And I think a regulation for this product, ensuring safety, ensuring appropriate use, and ensuring that this is not help smokers to continue smoking, but rather help them to quit, is something which I think is quite appropriate and should not be contrasted too much. I understand the reasons of the industry in this area. I mean, they want to have maximum freedom, but unfortunately for them, we are in a society we have to protect the consumers and not to allow anything without regulations. Thank you.
Of course,
I don't know. So I promised this person here with yellow, and then there's the gentleman here, yeah. And then I take you afterwards, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm representing the European Public Health Alliance, IFA, here in Brussels. My question is for the last gentleman that spoke. So you claim to represent the perspective of the consumers or the users of e-cigarettes. So looking at the results and the evidence that you presented, I'm actually really interested in learning how you gathered the data, how you gathered their opinions to come up with the results that you were actually presenting. Like what sort of question did you ask them? Like who did you interrogate? How many people? I know. I'm just a little surprised about about the difference between what you could ask them and the evidence that you're claiming to present. Thank you.
Did you understand the question? Yes. The question, I'll repeat the question and then I'll ask somebody else while you think about the answer. The question was that you said you represented European consumers, and where did you get your evidence from? Who have you talked to present evidence to us? That was the question. Then it was this gentleman here, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Francesco with the Good Clinical Practice Alliance Europe here in Brussels. I'm an ethicist and I've worked with the WHO as an advisor and also with European institutions. I'm very pleased to see this discussion here, Mrs. McAvan, and thank you for holding this because I think it's really necessary at this time. I was impressed with what the Commission had to say and also the other regulators this morning and what's being discussed here. And I also agree very much with your own question that you're asking, well, what kind of framework can we put this in? How can we put this into a good regulatory framework? I also agree with my own MEP here, Mrs. Ries, her strong concerns about how do we actually regulate this and how can we do it. And just my takeaway at the moment is really it seems almost too easy, too simple to put it into a medicine's regulatory framework. It seems like this is a ready-made solution that's already there for one set of products that are on the market. But the real question is, does the Commission not have a little bit more work to do to think about really how this particular product should be regulated, instead of putting it into, let's say, an already prefabricated framework that might not be appropriate for this product, for the consumers, and for the health needs that are there. In particular, really, this product seems to me to need to be firstly regulated with regard to the quality, with regard to the manufacturing. I think that's a major concern. And a second major issue, then, is the safety issue, and those issues as well. And a third issue, the efficacy or how well it works, how well it's uptake and so forth, that's another issue. But this might not require, and it might not be best regulated within the same framework as medicine. So if the Commission really wants to go down the direction towards what's needed toward the future within Europe, perhaps they have to also be a little bit more creative with regard to how we can regulate this product and perhaps other products that will be coming up that are similar to it.
Thank you. Okay, do you want to answer? No, yes.
If I may begin from the end, just to pull it from the end up. Regarding the safety, of course we are just a small community, let's say, but we've already made a lot of progress within the last month and a half year, writing to shops, looking for their self-regulation. We're looking that they put inside child security openers so that children are not able to open it. We reached the goal that they are not marked blue with 12 milligram and white with none milligram, but it's written big and not washable on the bottle. What is inside? Is it toxic? Is it nicotine inside? What flavor is it? A lot of shops followed this way. They didn't put nice pictures of oranges or strawberries on these bottles, but they just write what is inside. I mean, we are already self-regulating because either we don't want to lose it, and either, on the other hand, of course, the shop doesn't want to lose its business, of course. To go back then, where do we take our European opinion? The vapors, as we call us, are not all those that go into the next shop and buy themselves a starter set for I don't know how much money and start, and I'm happy. But I think you should have realized with the open letters and the other letters you've received that there's a large community which doesn't want to lose this possibility not to smoke anymore. And we have largely organized in the internet, may it be a new medium like Facebook, may it be forums. There are huge forums you already yourself quoted from with surveys. Of course, we are using the same scientific results, but to catch up Mr. Bertolini, we are maybe regarding them in the other way. When you say e-cigarettes release toxins into the air, including and so on, which we doubt, by the way, averaging around 20% of what the conventional cigarette produces. You say it's 20% of a conventional cigarette. We say it's 80% less than we normally would consume. So how do I compare it? This is a question. Also, it's some kind of how do I inform the consumer? When I say antifreeze, everybody is thinking of chemicals and toxic. What is the definition of antifreeze? Antifreeze are all compounds that mixed with a water-based liquid reduce the freezing point. Alcohol is also anti-freezing. Salt is also anti-freezing. So we don't say this is the cure to everything, but it's the far less dangerous alternative. So we follow the same point. It has no place in the tobacco directive, and it also has no place in the pharmaceutical branch. It has to find its own way.
Okay, I'm going to... Dr. Etter wanted to say something, and then is there anybody else in the room who wants to make a point? Florence, yeah. Yeah, again, yeah. First.
Also, I wanted to make I think an important point about realpolitik, right? You're dealing with an addictive product. People will do almost anything to get their drug when they're addicted, including addicted to nicotine. If you look, for instance, at situations where cigarettes are prohibited, in situations of war or more commonly in prison, prisoners are going to pay an extraordinarily, incredibly high price for just one cigarette. They're going to shed any pride just to get a cigarette, right? We're dealing with something addictive. And then you need to think about the impact of any regulation, right? You're going to do a regulation, medicine or not, but then is it going to be applied, right? People have an extraordinarily positive opinion of these e-cigarettes. They discover that even though they had no intention to quit, they use it and then quit, and they're going to get their e-cigarettes anyway, right? Then you're going to have black market if they can't have it. Then they're going to manufacture them at home. Then people are going to sell spare parts, and people from spare parts are going to get their e-cigarettes. It's somehow too late to control this. It's like a tsunami, right? It's coming at an incredible speed, and some regulation, in my opinion, mainly quality control is needed, but it's an addictive product, and there's a history about regulation of addictive products, and the history is failure, largely. You see, 70,000 people were killed in Mexico only during the Calderon presidency for the drug wars there. It's largely a failure the way we regulate. I'm not saying that I have the magic bullet, but think that it is an addictive product and that people are going to want it and get it anyway.
That would only be true if we were trying to ban it. So let's not compare it to illegal drugs, which we're going kind of too far now, not the other way. Yes.
I think the problem is that cigarettes are so harmful that we are willing to do almost anything to find an alternative. And it is so tempting to say to whatever new product comes, okay, it is less harmful, we will please take it instead. But I think we have a responsibility to the whole society, to the kids growing up, and also to the smokers, that the new product on the market is safe.
Okay, I've got seen one more person from the floor. Yes, Florence. Yeah, sorry, two.
Yes, it's just a small, very quick story, and then a question to the gentleman from the consumers organization. I'll start with a question, and it's very simple. I'd like to know how your organization is funded, if you could explain that very transparently. And the story is that I teach lobbying in a business school, and the case study I gave to my students, 56 they were, from all around the world, was actually e-cigarettes. So I sort of split them into 6 groups of stakeholders, but before doing that, I asked them, number one, do you know what an e-cigarette is? And they all knew. And secondly, have some of you used e-cigarettes? And about 9 had. And I asked them, why are you using e-cigarettes? None said it was because they wanted to quit. That was very clear. And what they told me is because they use it in places where they can't smoke. That was their answer. It's circumstantial, but it's not only to quit smoking. And that's the way, by the way, the e-cigarette producers advertise very often their product is not to quit smoking. It's actually to use in places when you can't smoke. So.
I really want you all to leave this room with a clear idea in your mind. The clear idea in your mind is the electronic cigarette is an alternative or a substitute and is used by smokers who are already poisoned. The issue of safety has to be made when a non-smoker or somebody who never smoked is going to approach this new product, which is not going to be the case. So please take in mind that when we talk about safety, what we are really talking is shifting somebody from an area where he was, from a habit where he was taking a lot of toxins to another area where it's been already demonstrated there are hundreds to 500 less toxins in the vapors. So that's a very important point. If we forget this, we forget everything. Regulation is important, but we really, I think Jean-Francois Etter just providing an avenue for the Commission. Let's work on the new product directive, something like that, molded around safety, so that we can make it the most safe product possible on ever. But remind all of us, I need to remind of all of us, that this is tobacco cigarette substitute, and for that particular reason is going to do a lot of good by itself.
Okay, yeah.
Just to comment to the last comment, I disagree because in the classroom of my wife in a lyceum in Milano, there are adolescents that started smoking using e-cigarettes instead of cigarettes. So at the end of the day, the regulation, I know very well the risk is quite different. I fully agree. But this is not the reason for not regulate the e-cigarettes. The regulation of the e-cigarette is just the way to control the use of e-cigarettes and make it the best, possibly the best way to quit smoking. I don't see any problem with this.
I'm not going to take any more questions or comments because I think we've come to the end of, it's 3:25. We've been sitting here since 12:30. I've been sitting in committee since 9 o'clock. So that's a long session. I think anybody who sat through this will realise how difficult an issue this is for regulators. It's not very often that we have splits inside the public health community on something like this, and that's what we've seen today. We know that the industry itself has different views. We know that some of them are uniting today now to try and say, don't regulate, wait for a new law, because that's a better approach. That also gains time for some of them to put products on the market. It's hard. And then I don't want to make the mistake we made with tobacco of catching up when we have a market flooded with products as well. And we need to make sure that the users are getting a product that's safe. I mean, we've already had evidence that some of them don't contain nicotine, that some of them aren't safe. There's totally different quality of product on the market. And you've said yourself you've had to go and ask the shops to label them properly. You shouldn't have to do this. This is not your job. That's the responsibility of those placing the product on the market. So we have to make sure that products placed on the market meet all those concerns. So we have a difficult job as MEPs. Thank you we only have till tomorrow to make amendments on this. We're talking amongst ourselves. Thank you for your patience, for listening, and I'm sure we will continue our discussions on e-cigarettes. And can I thank you all to thank our speakers today for coming and join me in thanking them. Thank you.